Well, no, you get 500,000.
Good evening, everyone. We're at the regular session of the Board of Education. We've already met in executive session, and we did the salute to the flag there. Okay, so we'll do the roll call.
Mr. Byrne? Here. Mrs. Cassell?
Here.
Mrs. Richmond?
Here.
Mrs. Smarter?
Here.
Mr. Fry? Here. Mrs. Shaw?
Here.
Mrs. Gray?
Here.
Mrs. McHugh?
Here.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Here.
Mr. Masai? Here. Madam President?
Thank you. I'd just like to draw your attention to the statement of public notice in your agenda. There are 2 times for input from the public. There is a public comment on agenda items, when you can speak on anything that's on the agenda, and then later in the meeting there is a public comment on non-agenda items for any other topics. And also I'd like to point out that the meeting is being recorded. So we're up to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. McEwen. So you probably noticed that Mr. Marcarian is not here. Unfortunately, he could not join us. So I will be filling in admirably for Mr. Marcarian. I do have some items for the superintendent's report. The first item is referencing a field trip on the agenda. You'll notice under finance number 4, one of the field trips that we're approving is hopefully a Google field trip for Cedar Hill and William Adams students. And both Steve and Kathy Isaacs were kind enough to join us tonight. They're in the front row. But you should have a little write-up on the field trip, a 1-page write-up. This is a very, very unique opportunity for the students to be able to visit Google headquarters in New York City, to get a tour of the facility and link this to the Google Computer Science First program, which I know both Kathy and Steve are very involved in. So it's a very unique opportunity. It is coming up pretty quick, so we had this opportunity happen rather suddenly, and to their credit, they really wanted to provide the students with this unique opportunity. But we did ask for them to join us tonight if you had any questions. I thought we would allow them to go home and after you asked them your questions. Any questions for them about the field trip?
Could they describe it?
Would you mind just coming up?
Describe it. Thank you.
Yep, there should be a mic, it should be working.
Hello, oh yes, okay. So we have kids that are participating in Google's CS First program. At Cedar Hill, it's a small group of 7 kids in the mini unit. And at A&M, it's...
I teach a game design and development course, and one of the options my students have is to participate in the CS First game design and development track. And I have between 10 and 12 students that have been actively participating that would be able to go as well. And the trip itself, Google's set it up as a celebratory event to acknowledge the work the students have been doing. And they are providing a tour of the Google office in New York, as well as putting together a panel. It's a number of schools that were invited. And the panel will consist of Google employees, and they'll be sharing information about jobs and technology, and accept questions and such. And then finally, the kids are going to be able to showcase the projects that they've been working on.
Yes.
John?
You get to drive the Google car?
We can only hope.
Anything's possible.
Is this an all-day affair?
No, it's a morning affair. So it's because of the response that they've gotten. There are going to be 3 a week. We're going to the morning session. So the plan is to leave around 6:30 because we have to be there by between 8:40 and 9 o'clock. If we miss that window, we won't be permitted in. So we'll leave around 6:30, and I think that we should be leaving the city around 11:30 because of that, whatever, however long, 12:30, 1 o'clock. So I guess maybe it could, I guess it does.
I think it looks like they should be back, by 12:30, so they'll have, an afternoon of some of the classes.
Right. It appears to me also that the day that you go is not really up to your choice. It was decided by Google, is
Yes.
that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And is this first program the same one, the robotics first program? Or
No.
that's a different first?
That's it.
program?
Yeah, the robotics first program, that's a robotics program. This is computer science, so it's all programming, thematic programming units put together by Google.
Yes.
I would ask you to keep your eyes open. Maybe the seniors ought to be invited. The exposure to a wonderful company and the computer system and everything, if it would make sense for the high school, please come back and tell them. You're going to see it firsthand.
Wayne?
I just want to have really a comment. I just think it's so exciting, and it's going to be such a wonderful experience. I really appreciate you bringing this to us and giving it to our students and offering it to them, because I think this is the kind of thing that, especially in a young child, could spark some sort of interest, and you just don't know where it'll take them. So I think it's wonderful. Very exciting.
Karen?
I totally agree. I think it's fantastic, and I hope it catches on to somebody in the elementaries. I have a question which has no bearing on whether I support or don't support. It's just curiosity. How many boys versus girls are participating?
Well, in my mini unit, there are 3 girls and 4 boys. And then on the the kids that would be going, I think it's 2 girls, 3 boys.
And mine for this activity happens to be heavily favoring boys, just because the way the kids chose or didn't choose to do this activity, it just so happened. And there were 2 girls that were eligible to go. One is going, the other chose not to.
Just out of curiosity, in your game design class, what's the ratio like?
Well, it's interesting. The ratio still, it favors boys, but what was interesting is that was a big concern of mine a number of years ago. when we only offered it as an elective, and the people, is that me? The people signing up were only signing up based on seeing it in the course catalog. So we made a change in our 7th grade cycle program. So every 7th grader now has experience in game design and digital storytelling as part of the cycle for the computer cycle, and that has dramatically increased the number of girls that are participating. So it probably went from a horrible number like 90–95% boys to 70 to 80, or 75 to 80%. But it's a definite noticeable change. I've even done research with somebody at an organization in Seattle. They were doing research with my class, and that was one of the things they were looking at. So I was able to give them that data. So we're trying. Definitely trying.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? I agree that it sounds really exciting. I have a friend that was just at the Google headquarters out on the West Coast and came home so excited. This is an adult friend, but I'm sure it'll be very exciting for the kids. Thank you.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. Okay. Just a couple more items. The other item that Mr. Markarian wanted to update you on is the park participation. Well, we had our first EOY last week on the 21st, and we wanted to kind of give you some context for the participation. Again, these numbers are hot off the press, if you will. So just to give you a comparison, we had, this is at the high school, grades 9, 10, 11. We administered, I'll first give you the PBA number from March 23rd. We had 1,410 students in the classes, so that's all 3 classes, 9, 10, 11. We had 796 participate. That's a 56% participation rate when you average those participation rates. That was the March 23rd PBA. So now, to give you a comparison for the EOY on April 21st, same class size of 1,410. This time around, we had only 612 participate, so the participation rate then was 43.4%. So again, don't have any other numbers for you, but we wanted to give you some initial numbers at least. I know that as we continue to monitor and students take these EOYs, we'll continue to provide the numbers.
If I can give you, this is it's anecdotal feedback. I was given feedback from a high school student that because the delivery of park abutted the spring break week, many students saw it and their families saw it as an opportunity to extend their spring break vacation. So that might account for the lower participation rate.
Explain it.
Yeah.
Any questions on that? Okay, and then the last thing is just a bit of good news, as we like to share from Barbara Retzko. The last couple of weekends in April, our singers auditioned for the 2015 New Jersey All-State Mixed Chorus and the 2016 Women's Chorus. There were about 1,200 students across the state that participated in this, and we had 12 of our singers accepted. So that's pretty exciting news. The Mixed Chorus actually begins rehearsals in June in Atlantic City for the NJEA convention, and then again the following week, and the Women's Chorus begins rehearsals in September, and they actually perform at the NJPAC in February. So that's pretty exciting, so just wanted to share that bit of good news as well.
Thank you.
Do you have the numbers for middle school and elementary schools?
I do not, no.
They just started today. 8th grade started, and I didn't even see my 8th grader today, so I couldn't ask her what the turnout looked like, but yeah. Okay. We're up to public comment on agenda items. If anyone has any comments, please put your name and address on the clipboard. Okay, then I will close public comment. We're up to item 9, which is approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to the minutes? Elaine? Second? Karen? Thank you. Any comments or questions about the minutes before we vote? No? Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne?
I'm going to qualify mine if I was there, yes. I missed a couple, and I don't remember which one.
Mrs. Smarter?
Yes, on March 23rd, I need to abstain on April 6th.
Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mr. Proud?
Yes.
Mrs. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Waldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McHugh?
Yes on the first two, abstain on the third one, the exec session, and then yes on the last one. And Karen, do you have to abstain on the exec session as well? Oh, yeah. So she's abstaining on April 6th also.
It all blurs together after we have
I know, I had to ask which meeting, I was like, which meeting is that I wasn't there? So we're up to committee reports. We have finance items 1 through 18. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'd like to move items 1 through 18.
Would someone like to second it? Linda? Thank you. Would you have?
Yeah, let me just get a little update on this. I think items 1 through 3 are usual recurrent items, approval of disbursements, receipt of financial and treasurer's report, and budget item, line item transfers. Item 4 is approval of new field trip destinations. We heard about one of them already. The other is a Ridge Band high school trip on a Sunday. The second is a fourth grade trip on a weekday to see a play. The Lightning Thief, which is aligned with the grade's curriculum mythology unit. And let's see, item 5, make sure I've got the same number. Sometimes there's a change from there. It's still okay. Item 5 is routine disposal of equipment and books. Items 6 through 8 are 3 temporary home instruction placements for gen ed students. Item 9 is approval of an aid for an existing student. Item 10 is a change in placement for an existing student. Item 11 is the acceptance of tuition in for an incoming student from out of district, prorated for the year. Item 12 is approval of subscription busing rates for next year. It's going to be a $10 increase over last year. Items 13 and 14 are the acceptance of the bids for the Wellness Center and the turf field. We can talk about those. We'll get to the rest of it. The item 15 is approval of a sale of an outdated laptop cart. Item 16 is acceptance of a generous donation from the Mount Prospect PTO of $10,548.90 to purchase Chromebooks and a cart. And item 17 is approval of a generous donation from the PEC for $3,000 to purchase technology items for the special needs students. And item 18 is professional development expenses for several employees. I guess we should go back to the Wellness Center and turf field bids. You can see there on the agenda, you can see what the other bids were, and these are the lowest bids that, is it lowest, is some word, the lowest accurate? Lowest responsible bid. And these came within what we, the numbers are actually pretty good compared to what we thought we might have to pay. So, any questions? Mike?
Number 10, is that the special ed student that was here, and is, why are we paying?
It's a change in placement for an existing student. So in other words, special ed student, yeah.
Number 12, is that all buses?
Yes, that's the subscription busing. So if you don't qualify because of distance away from school, you can pay.
Okay. And then I didn't understand 18.
Those are professional development expenses.
Can you explain? I don't understand it.
These are,
This is individual teachers?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is funny the way it's phrased, but if you look down below, you'll see it's
Now I
usual.
understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just have a quick question, I think maybe for Rob, but on number 12, is the effort or the intent to break even or it be no cost to the district?
Yeah.
So are we reaching a point where it's just the numbers of families or students that are actually subscribing to busing is getting so low that we have to increase the price, or is it that?
It's a matter of
so we've been ready and mentioning it.
And my understanding is transportation costs have
Well, this is being billed to us from the county, right? We'll have to pay for it.
Well, this is based on what it costs us to get a seat on our
Right.
bus through the service.
Right, exactly, yeah.
You know, we would do it at a fairly low rate, but the operating costs, that would go up.
Are going up.
So do you know if there's been any measurable shift one way or the other in terms of total subscribers?
It stays fairly constant.
Anyone else have any questions? No? Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Burr,
Yes, except for 13, no.
Mrs. Swarner,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes?
Mrs. Cassell,
Yes.
Mr. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw,
Yes.
Mrs. Woldridge,
Yes.
Mrs. McHugh.
Yes.
Madam President.
Thank you. We're up to personnel. We have items 1 through 20. Bev, would you like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion for items 1 through 20, although I want to note that on the agenda, it says that item 20 is item 10. So we should probably change that to item 20.
Someone like to second it? Preeti, thank you.
This is all fairly standard personnel stuff. The big item of note is item number 20, which is approving the salary guide for the upcoming school year. Any questions? And I'll have a committee report once we voted.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Burr,
I'd like to report before the vote.
Oh. That's,
Oh, was there another
I'm
question?
sorry, yeah, I did.
Okay, sorry.
I don't have my hand very high.
Okay.
In item 15, I'm just not familiar with immigrant tutoring. Is that different from EFL?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a grant from the federal government, right, Sean? And we can use it to tutor students who are recent immigrants.
and I'm happy to do my report.
Okay, want to do the report? That's
Which is
fine.
fine.
Okay, and then we'll vote.
Personnel just met this past Thursday. The longest and biggest agenda item was a review of the interventionist position that Ms. O'Connell and Ms. Vitale-Stanzioni were kind enough to come and talk to us about. I know that you already received one board presentation, and both personnel and curriculum have gotten it, and I sent the presentation out with the minutes. So to just give you the highlights, this recommendation was made in response by a New Jersey School Board Association study because of the dramatic increase in special education referral rates. The interventionist position is being recommended to address the struggling learner who falls somewhere between a classified special education student and a general education student. Right now in our district, about 15% of our students are classified, and with this position, it's hoped that we could get closer to the district goal, desired goal, of 7 to 8% being classified. The interventionist would be providing support for the INRS meetings as well as training our teachers to prevent classifications but yet give these struggling learners the help they need to stay on track. Most of the information was in my committee report as well as the committee report that Linda sent out from curriculum, but I did receive some additional information today from Ms. O'Connell that I think is very compelling. It's the potential financial savings of our district if this position was put in place. Right now, a special education student on average costs our district $17,500 a year. A general education student costs $9,229 a year to educate. So that's a differential or a potential savings of $8,271 a year for students that aren't classified. So if conservatively we say that we're going to put an interventionist in place that just prevents 2 students a year in each of our 4 elementary school buildings from being classified and going into special education, that's a $66,000 savings a year that builds year over year over year. that these students remain in Gen Ed and their needs as struggling learners are still being addressed. Then if you add in the extended school year stipend, which is another $7,700, the savings could be $73,668 a year if this position was in place and successful in preventing classification. If any of you would like these numbers in detail, I can send out an addendum to the minutes after tonight.
But those students aren't usually the students that get extended school year, are they?
Not necessarily, it's my understanding. Yeah, not necessarily, it just depends.
Let her do the report and then, yeah.
Yeah. The second item we talked about was staffing priorities, and you all have a spreadsheet in front of you that we're going to be discussing in board forum. Obviously, we have more requests for additional staff positions than funding available to add all of them. So we're going to have a discussion later on where we think the money needs to go regarding that. And as you all recall, that was one of the personnel committee goals this year, to not just add positions randomly, but really to prioritize where we want to put our money. The only thing that we're actually voting on tonight, I was going to report out, is we're going to vote tonight on the appointment of Tara Bowman to fill in as math supervisor during Ms. Wolf's maternity leave. She is currently both a math teacher and an instructional coach, and her position will be covered then. And finally, the only other thing is we continue negotiations with the BTAA. Our next meeting is scheduled for May the 5th. Do you have any questions?
This, I read the curriculum minutes, so some of it overlaps. Maybe she could answer. I don't know. Wait.
Yeah, why don't you wait, because Linda's going to report on it, and then we're going to talk about it.
On the position.
Oh, on one of these positions?
Like, aren't we voting on it?
No, we're not, no, we're having a discussion later.
We're having a discussion at board forum. This is a list of all the positions that have been
We're
requested.
going to discuss all.
And we're going to have a discussion on prioritization. So when we determine the final amount of funds we have available to add additional staff, we know the order with which we would like to add them.
So I think I already know the answer, I'm just asking the question. I think there's 2 reading specialists at every elementary.
That's going to be part of my report.
That's what
I have details on that, yeah.
Okay, and then I think you're only looking for 1 intervention for the whole district. Right?
Yes.
I'll ask you as well.
Any other questions about my committee report?
One on the cost savings, if we were successful, and I'd like to have a little bit more information on the improvement in education of those that were shifted from the special ed program to the general ed program. And then secondly, rather than deal with averages, look at the true impact, because you're averaging, somebody that's at $400,000 a year to somebody that might be 16 or 8 or something. I'd like to know if you take out those students that are the most probable ones to shift, what the true cost savings would be or estimated, rather than using the average.
Are you saying like the average special ed cost, because some are really expensive and some.
I think there's 2 ways to approach it. We could table these till we're having the discussion about the position, or if you prefer, we have the experts here who are available to answer those questions, because I'm not in a position to determine.
Well, I didn't expect it right
Yeah.
now. If they could give us.
Yeah, we can get follow-up information on that, sure.
And the second question, I see there's 4 teachers, and I've never seen immigration tutoring before.
We've had it before, because actually my son got it for a little while, so it's been around. I don't know for how many years though,
It
but.
has nothing to do with the people coming across the border.
Now, this is for students who moved here from other countries, and the federal government gives this grant money, so we might as well use it. It's part of No Child Left Behind. So we have this money available to use from the federal government, so it's not costing us anything.
Has the township seen, the immigrants coming across the Mexican border? Have they seen any tremendous impact at all?
I mean, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think what this is for children who are moving into our community legally from other countries, whether it's through adoption or through the families immigrating.
Yeah, if I can step in, this is for our ESL population. These are students who are identified as English as a second language. Mike, and we've been doing this now for a number of years, where we use this grant money to provide additional tutoring services in their coursework.
Okay, and the question I was asking, if the immigrants coming across the border are being placed across the nation, and are
I
they
think that-
There's no indication.
Okay, so that was my question. Good. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote? No? Yes. Did you have a question, Jen?
I just wanted to.
Okay, sure.
I think the tutoring, I think it started 4 years ago.
4 or 5 years.
Yes, because I think I was one of the.
Okay. Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes?
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Forkage?
Yes.
Mrs. McKeon?
Yes.
Madam President?
Thank you. We're up to policy. We have one item under policy. Would someone like to make a motion for that item? Linda? Would someone like a second? Creepy? Thank you. Why don't we do the committee report first before we vote on it?
I'm just going to start by saying that Preeti was not at the meeting, so I took the minutes and will be reporting out.
Take your mic out and hold it. It's easier.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Is it too loud?
No.
As I mentioned in the minutes, there was a lot of information that we covered in the policy meeting. It was a big stack, and we didn't even get to everything Nick had intended. So I'll start with, I'm sorry, I'm not on the agenda page. What is that item on the agenda?
Just one, first reading.
Okay. So we discussed the nepotism policy. I don't know if anyone, well, we'll save questions. We discussed and recommended adding the language that previously existed and was inadvertently removed when the very big policy binder update was done in August of 2013, which I know some of you were part of. So we'll just be adding back the language that had been there and there was no intention to remove. And that would be what the first reading tonight is for. The next policy was on the prevention and treatment of sports-related concussions. And actually, it wasn't really about that policy so much as it was about discussion regarding whether or not there should be an equal and similar policy for non-sports related head injuries and a return to school or to PE. So Mr. Markarian reviewed the history of the existing policy and the return to play procedures that are in place for any student athlete who has or may have suffered a concussion. The policy only covers student athletes and cheerleaders, however. Questions arose regarding students who suffer a head injury outside of school or in a non-team related situation. The nurses would like to address these instances the same as those involving athletes. They are interested in having all students comply with a return to play protocol before returning to PE class. This would necessitate some changes, such as creating some type of form letter that a parent would need to have completed by their child's doctor to return to PE. Mr. Markarian did say that, and speaking with at least one of the nurses at Rich High School, he is finding that she is not having any difficulty getting parents to comply with that protocol, even though there isn't a specific policy in place. And I just wanted to make the distinction because it was so clear in the discussion that this policy exists for all student athletes and cheerleaders. So any change would just to be basically to adopt a policy that would apply to all students, whether they're student athletes or cheerleaders or just someone of the general student population. And he brought it to our attention because he felt we should be thinking about whether or not we want to hold all students to the same standard of care. He also reported, oh, I mentioned that about the nurses. Mr. Fry pointed out that student athletes and cheerleaders already receive a mandatory baseline concussion test, which would be cumbersome to have the entire student body participate in, so there would probably need to be some distinctions if we were to adopt language to make that policy apply to everyone. I think I kind of addressed the questions, but you can ask questions later, but I did put some possible questions in there that might come up. Then there was the Strauss-Esme policy alert, which covered a good number of, but not all the policies. The board self-evaluation, I know the board is aware of, there was a policy in place that was mandated that school boards were required to complete a self-evaluation every year. It was not a very effective policy, and as such, the advice has been that it's no longer a requirement and that the board can make the decision when and how to self-evaluate. So we're recommending that for first reading tonight. 152 was the board officers policy, and this change was recommended by Strauss-Esme in response to recent requests for guidance regarding election of board officers. Previously, it had been that the election of officers required a plurality of the full board. The change just states that a majority of whomever is present on the day that the vote takes place, it will be adequate. And we are recommending that for adoption this evening, or for first reading this evening. 2622 is a student assessment. This is a mandatory policy. And in large part, the purpose of this policy change is to address the removal of the HESPA and its replacement with PARC. In an effort to avoid future revisions for naming convention only, the policy guide from Strauss-Esme removes all references to a particular test by name, instead replacing it with state standardized testing for students. There's extensive verbiage if anyone's interested in the policy. I won't bore you with it. Policy 3212 was attendance for teachers and 4212 for support staff, and the revision basically details two items. First, it clarifies the definition of sick leave as a person's absence from work because of personal disability due to injury or illness, and that's just a clarification. And the second one is to address the fact that the superintendent has the right to request that a faculty or staff member produce a doctor's note for a sick day. These are both highly recommended changes, and as such, the committee is recommending both of them for adoption. And then 5200 is student attendance. Excuse me. It's a lengthy policy which was only just updated earlier this school year. During the prior discussion, there was much attention paid to how ambiguous the definition of excused and unexcused absences is. So this policy guide update recommends, well, gives preferred language, and that basically explains that unexcused absences, wait, I want to get this right. There is no circumstance in which a student may be unexcused that does not count toward truancy, and that's the entirety of the significance of that change. And then the last policy was 5465, which is early graduation, and it is mandatory, and it was similar to the required changes in the student assessment policy, which were basically to address the elimination of HESPAs as an early graduation requirement, and that would be replaced with a general statement regarding whatever the state-by-state testing at the time will be, and we are recommending that as well for adoption. Any questions?
I have a couple comments, but 5200, I don't understand no attendance. Mr. Markarian explained that Strauss-Eastman has updated the language to correct that there is no attendance circumstance in which a student may be unexcused that does not count toward truancy. Are you saying that if they're out, and therefore it's a truancy?
Truancy means that a student is not present and we don't know either the parent has not reported in that, either by telephone or by note that they are sick or that they're taking them on a vacation, or they're absent without explanation for their absence. And everything else, correct me if I'm not getting this right, because we talked about this way back in the fall, and we'll probably talk about it again. Everything else is, it's explained that you're not truant, it's an excused absence. But it's not the same excused absence as if you took your child to work or religious holidays.
Okay.
I don't know if
So
that-
truancy is a problem.
I don't know that truancy is a problem because this is something that's.
This is a mandated policy, so I don't think truancy is a problem in our district. I haven't heard of kids being truant, but they're just defining what it is excused versus unexcused and truant.
Just as a point of, and anyone who was there for the discussions, please chime in, but it was very, very confusing in the beginning. And so I think they were attempting to add clarity, although, missed it by that much. So we really never discussed the problem of truancy, Mike. It was just a matter of the language that the mandatory policy calls for.
Well, I read it in the minutes, and you explained it again, and I didn't understand either one, so that helps.
John is going to chime in.
I'll try. If a student is absent and there is no excuse, no one calls in, no note or anything, that child is considered truant until it's clarified. Everything else, if they're absent, they are considered unexcused, but not true. In other words, truancy is they're not here and there's no excuse. If they're not here and they have an excuse, then, okay.
It's really not whether it's an excuse or not. It's more like, do you have a good excuse or not a good, like, you could have an excuse, but it's not a good one, so it's still unexcused. Do you know what I'm saying?
And there are
Like
only.
you went on vacation.
Right, but there are only those two other circumstances, take your child to work day and religious holidays.
That are excused. Right.
And where you'll be given time to make up.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the other two comments, one, I don't like the idea that two people show up and they elect themselves, the president and the vice president.
Oh, no, I think you still have to have a quorum.
Well, it doesn't say.
Well, it's in the policy, we just, yeah.
Okay,
And I
so you have to have at least five.
Yes.
Okay. And I don't like park, and I don't like some other thing that doesn't even exist either, coming in to replace park. So I'm going to fight the 26, 22, 54, 6. I understand that there ought to be a state test, but I don't think we have one yet. So that, even though it has no name or park survives, so I'm going to vote no until the state of New Jersey fixes what they're doing to us.
Understood, just to be clear, it is mandatory that we have that policy.
I understand, but I think that's a farce because the test doesn't exist in a test report or in a recognized. Okay.
Any other question? We have a roll call, please.
Mr. Burr.
Yes on everything but 26, 22, and 54, 65, which are both.
Mrs. Sparta,
Yes.
Mrs. Spray,
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell,
Yes.
Mr. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw, Mrs. Waldron,
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen,
Yes.
Madam President.
Thank you. Okay, we're up to curriculum. Linda's going to do her curriculum report, which has a lot of stuff in it. And I'm going to ask that people hold the questions about the interventionist position until we get to board forum. So we can just get done with the curriculum report, and then we'll talk about it, and people can ask all the questions they want at that point.
Voting on everything?
No, it's just a report. So let's just let her get through it. Go for it, Linda.
Yeah, I got my work cut out for me. Okay. So at our curriculum meeting on Thursday, we talked about the interventionist position. We also talked about our current reading specialists and instructional support teachers. So I'm going to try to differentiate among all those different staff members. Bev also gave an overview already of the interventionist position, so I'm just going to add some additional details. So one of the goals of the interventionist position is to merge general and special education services. They're currently quite separate. So the interventionist role would be to merge the two services by offering special education expertise to the general education student and teacher. The other thing I wanted to mention is that of our 797 special education students, not all of these students would be targeted for the response to intervention. Only those currently classified as specific learning disability or other health impaired, and I put definitions of those two categories in the minutes. And I wanted to also point out that students in the autistic program and self-contained classes definitely require special education services, and they're not the focus of this new position. Regarding the intervention and referral services team, there is one at each building now, and the function of the team is to evaluate all students before they're referred for additional evaluation to see if they're eligible to receive special education. And the interventionist would be a new administrative member of the team who would provide additional expertise in special education instructional models, adding to what the team has now. The other aspect of the interventionist would be currently the supervisory responsibilities in special education are divided between the director and 2 supervisors. And with the addition of the interventionist, the responsibilities within the department would be reorganized to provide more focus on grades 6 through 12. The new special education supervisor for grades 6 through 12 would be able to address specific 6 through 12 issues such as school refusal, which is increasing in our school district, and would also be able to provide alternative programs for students to meet high school graduation requirements. And there is quite a bit more detail in the minutes, which everyone's had a chance to read. So, and then if you have questions, we'll be doing that at board forum. The next topic that we talked about at curriculum, because we had questions about it, were the current reading specialists and instructional support teachers. So these staff members work only with general education students, and they use general education techniques. So each of the elementary schools has 2 full-time reading specialists, and they provide instructional support to general education students in reading and writing. And they also provide literacy coaching to the general education elementary school teachers. They have both a New Jersey elementary teaching certificate and a New Jersey reading specialist certificate. However, they do not have a certificate in special education, and they cannot diagnose special education disabilities. The way it works is that the general education classroom teachers have several tools that they can use to determine if their students require instructional support. They have the continuum of literacy learning, the K2 phonics program, and a developmental reading assessment called the DRA2, which measures comprehension, fluency, accuracy, and grade level. All the general ed teachers give the DRA2 in the fall and the spring. And if a student meets the benchmark to enter into the instructional support program, a reading specialist is then called in, and they use some additional tools to evaluate the student. The benchmark assessment system, and then they use the level of literacy intervention system to provide instructional support. Then, if these interventions don't work, the student is referred to the INRS team in the building and the child study team for evaluation. If that student then is classified and receives an IEP, then they no longer work with the reading specialist. Instead, They either have in-class support from a special education teacher in their general education classroom, or they're assigned to the resource room where they're taught a modified curriculum as specified in their IEP. Each of our elementary schools also has two full-time instructional support teachers who remediate general education students in literacy and mathematics if these students have not met the state standards on the state exams, which up until this year has been the NJ Ask, and will be Park, I guess, starting next. Liberty Corner and Mount Prospect have one literacy and one math instructional support teacher, and at Cedar Hill and Oak Street, the two instructional support teachers fill both roles. So the other thing that Mr. Pardon?
About the instructional support teachers at Cedar Hill.
Yeah, they have two instructional support teachers at Cedar Hill and two at Oak Street, but they both can do literacy and math coaching. That's what I mean. Right.
Can do either one.
Yeah. And a student who needs extra help in reading or writing may be assigned to either a reading specialist or an instructional support teacher, depending upon the schedule in the building. So there is some overlap in the literacy area. Okay. The next topic that we talked about at the meeting was drug and alcohol prevention, and specifically the DARE program and the Botman Life Skills program. The William Annan, an elementary school resource officer, Tracy Baldessari, currently teaches the DARE program to 5th graders at the 4 elementary schools. Ms. Hudock and the William Annan health teachers have proposed moving the DARE 5th grade program to 6th grade at William Annan, where it can be part of a more comprehensive drug and alcohol program. Ms. Baldessari was at our curriculum meeting, and she explained that DARE America and DARE New Jersey have 2 different programs. This year, she's teaching the DARE America Keeping It Real program to the 5th graders. DARE New Jersey has a new program called Too Good for Drugs that is a more complete program, and it's age appropriate for 6th graders. It consists of 10 lessons that cover alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, peer pressure, and self-esteem. And so if DARE is moved to 6th grade, Ms. Baldessari said that she would do grade level presentations at the elementary schools on topics such as internet safety. The next thing that we talked about was Botman Life Skills, which is a research-based, structured substance abuse prevention program that reduces the risk of alcohol, tobacco, and drug use by teaching students skills to resist peer pressure, help them cope with anxiety and develop self-confidence, and teach students the consequences of substance abuse. The program covers grades 3 through 9. The district received 3rd grade materials several years ago through a grant, and these materials are currently used in the 3rd grade health classes. The 2015-16 budget includes approximately $10,000 for 6th grade and 9th grade materials for a pilot program, because the skills and subjects taught in the program need to be reinforced as students progress through adolescence. And then the final topic that we talked about was we got a brief update on the Gifted and Talented program. Let's see. The data from the 2nd grade COGAT and MAP testing will be available by the end of May, and the 2nd grade teachers have also completed their Renzulli scales, and this is the identification process for the 2nd graders who would be going into 3rd grade next year and would be joining the Gifted and Talented program. In an attempt to balance the gender ratio among the students currently in the program, the teachers in grades 3 to 5 were asked to recommend additional students who were not identified through the criteria that were used this school year, which was the MAP score in mathematics and a diagnostic math assessment given at the beginning of the school year. The additional students recommended for the gifted program was approximately 2/3 boys and 1/3 girls, so this technique didn't significantly change the gender ratio. The gender ratio will be recalculated in June of 2015 after the current 2nd graders have been tested and identified. And I mentioned that it's the COGAP, the MAP test, and the Renzulli scales. The administration will continue to look at how to allow additional on-ramps into the accelerated math program so that students, and particularly girls, will have the chance to enter at different points. The data from honors and AP math courses at Ridge shows that the girls are clearly capable of succeeding in advanced math courses. In the future, the Gifted and Talented program will be expanding to include language arts, which is expected to help balance the gender ratio as well. And we did have 2 other items on the agenda, and they were postponed until the May 8th meeting because of time constraints. So does anyone have any questions on, not on the interventionist position, but on the other topics?
For the 70-30, when the teachers suggested students, then did those students get an opportunity to be part of GMT, or were they not considered?
I think that we're leaving it alone. That's correct, isn't it, Brian?
Sure.
We're keeping it as it is.
So they were not added on?
No. John?
You mentioned that the reading specialists are general ed teachers. Is there a reason why they are general ed as opposed to special ed? I mean, I would think that special ed teachers would have more training in reading specialists.
Do you want to take that one?
Their certification is defined, the reading specialist cert is a general ed cert, if you will. It's not a special ed cert per se. It doesn't preclude them from working with special education students, but their certification is technically a general ed cert, the reading specialist cert.
So they have had specific training.
Correct.
Yeah, in reading remediation for general education.
Just repeating comments from the past. I think the second grade test and then leaving the kids in a program without requalifying them each year is a farce. I think it's a mistake, and I think it should be reviewed. The gender ratio is another one that that's not the driving force of this test. I hope it's not something that's permanent. I hope it varies year to year. And drug and alcohol, I'm going to say for the forum at the end, board forum.
I just wanted to follow up with a comment on the gifted and talented. The numbers are concerning about the ratios, girl to boy. I'd like to see, I know I've talked about this with Linda, but I just wanted to say it loud. I mean, we're interested in getting language arts, gifted and talented going as well, because I think that might, you might see different numbers there, and then that would be more sort of equal, because there is a concern about a program that's serving a very small part of, 4 teachers for a very small part of our students, and we want to be equitable with how we spend our money.
I'm sure this might come up when we're talking about our staffing priorities. Does anyone else have any questions about Linda's minutes before we move on? Okay. We are now up to advocacy.
Advocacy met on April 6th, and we met with PTO presidents and asked them for their ideas for topics for a more casual forum, if you were to do that. And so the topics that they chose, that they offered to talk about were the start time for school, hoping that it could be a later start time for high school and middle school kids, technology, Common Core and how it affects our district, things the board would like the public to know, communication in terms of like PTO newsletters, websites, how PTOs communicate with their parents, how the school communicates with their parents, and such. Stress, bullying, and belonging. They want to have more of a talk about that. When we asked the PTO presidents about their concerns and issues and comments, they talked more about communications and the newsletters because they're very labor intensive and offer a lot of information, really good quality information about each school, but they're finding that the parents aren't really reading them. And they're trying to weigh whether they want to continue with them, if they should be collaborating together and trying to do more communications together. So that's one of the concerns. They talked about security, and again, the layman and PTO generously donated money for the new doors and security wall. So they were talking about security in all the schools, and then I believe that was going to become a finance topic eventually, maybe in May. And then they were also still concerned about the parent-teacher conferences and whether there would be one or two and when those would be. And Mr. McCarran told them, talked to them about the survey that he's putting together, and it was going to talk to the principals and their cabinet meeting and then get back to them on that. We quickly talked about the Friday folders, and Mr. McCarran shared that the data that he has collected, that only approximately 50% of Friday folders get opened, which is a really sad number. And it seems like parents are also relying on instant answers and asking friends rather than looking for information themselves. So they need it, or they're going on Facebook and asking, the answers are in things that have been provided. And then we also talked about the resolution that was on the April 6th Board of Education meeting agenda. And our next meeting is May 4th, so Monday. So, yep. Any questions?
Was there any way to check if, I doubt, like, say for example, two members get the same email, maybe one family member opens it and the other family member doesn't open it?
But that was definitely a possibility, but we didn't analyze the numbers.
Yeah. We didn't get that.
Yeah, we didn't get that. So, but he said, we definitely suggested that as a possibility, why don't we 50%, but still was significant.
And I think some people don't take themselves off of the Friday folders when they move on. So there might be some people getting it who aren't in the school anymore. But I still think more than 50% should get open.
Yeah.
Okay, we are up to liaison reports. Do we have any?
Yes. Okay, I have Municipal Alliance and also the Somerset County Ed Services. So the Municipal Alliance met on April 7th, and let's see, we had an update on Project Adventure from Kathy Lime, and she reported that funds from 2 municipal youth service grants from the 2013-14 and the 2014-15 grant are being used to construct a zip line at Ridge for the Project Adventure program. So that construction's underway right now. They had, they had
In the gym?
no outside. They had some setbacks because of the very, very cold winter, but now that the winter's over, it can proceed. And then the students in the RAD, Ridge Against Alcohol and Drugs, on April 9th, they presented Out of the Mouths of Teens. And this year, for the first time, they're going to be participating in the Ridge Activities Night, which is May 4th. So they're very excited about that. There was, on March 28th, there was a prescription medicine drop-off drive-through, and they collected 198 pounds of medication, which is just phenomenal. So people have a lot of medication in their homes that they're not using.
How much did you say?
Pardon me?
How much did you say?
198 pounds of medication, yeah. And then John Millay said that another medicine drop-off may take place at the Township Engineering Building on October 10th, 2015, which is the same day as the Town Shred Day. 2 big events for Municipal Alliance coming up are Charter Day on May 16th and the Twilight Challenge on June 7th, which is their big fundraiser for the year. Okay, so I also attended the Out of the Mouths of Teen presentation on Thursday the 9th, and I just thought it was really good, and it was also really interesting because we were hearing from the kids instead of the grown-ups talking to us about what was going on with the kids. And you know, a few things that were a bit disturbing to me. One is that students in the high school are using Adderall, which is a stimulant, to stay up and finish homework or to prep for certain things when they're under a lot of stress. And that, to me, that's concerning. I knew that it was being used at college. I didn't realize it was being used in high school. That e-cigarettes are becoming a lot more popular with students, and that quite a few students, usually guys, use chewing tobacco as well. And so those were some kind of, you know, different information that came out when the students were talking. As far as the Somerset County Ed Services, we had a meeting on April 9th. It was a very busy day for me. And we had a tour of the Career Center, and so they have 3 programs now in the Career Center. One is the ShopRite, one is a computer graphics technology class, and the other is a small engines program. And that was pretty much the main content of the meeting. Most of the meeting was actually a personnel closed session, so it wasn't too long.
Thank you, Linda. Does anyone have any questions for Linda? We're now up to public comment on, I guess it's not listed as non-agenda. I think it's public comment on any items is the new name for it. If there's anyone who would like to come up. If you come up, you can put your name and address on the clipboard and use the mic at the little podium there. Thank you.
Where's the clipboard?
Right down there at the podium. Oh, it's over there. Okay. Sorry, I can't see what's down there.
Hi, my name is Morgan Hill, and sorry, feedback. And I'm a senior at Ridge High School, and this year I, of course, took health like every other senior for the 4th time. And for the 4th time, we had sex ed. And yet again, for the 4th time, I got absolutely nothing out of this class due to an appalling gap in our curriculum. Our sex ed curriculum completely ignores queer-specific sexual health information. By not including the information relevant to the LGBTQ community, you deny equal education to an entire community. To address some concerns, I understand that homosexuality and gay rights are very hot topics right now, very controversial, but this is not a matter of controversy, but rather a matter of health, safety, and equality for our students. Well, 2 men and 2 women obviously can't get pregnant together. STDs are still a very big threat, and in addition, more students than ever are coming out, and with apps like Grindr and Tinder, more gay students are dating, which means, you know what that means. And that means that they need sex ed relevant to them in order to keep safe. There's also the concern that the LGBT community is a small community at Ridge, and therefore maybe the information won't exactly apply to most of the students. But the issue isn't how many people it applies to, but rather that it does apply to some. To some students, kids who deserve an equal education, and your kids that we need to keep safe. Queer-specific sex ed doesn't even take that much time. In the time that I have been talking to you, you could have educated an entire community on how to practice safe sex. And if we have time to have seniors carry around stuffed animals for a week, I think we have time to explain that 2 men need to use condoms and that dental dams need to be used for 2 women. Queer-specific sex education is a very important topic because of the matter of equal education and a matter of safety. There are gay kids at Ridge. We are no longer a nameless, faceless, anonymous, closeted community. We are out, we're dating, and we need equal education. education. Therefore, queer-specific sex ed needs to be a permanent part of the normal health curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We'll refer your concerns to the curriculum committee, and we'll have a discussion about it. Thank you. Is there anyone else for public comment? No? Okay, at this point, I'll close public comment. We are up to board forum. I'm sure there might be a couple other topics, but our main topic for board forum tonight is going to be the list of staffing priorities that was compiled. It was discussed at the personnel committee, and it's been discussed a little bit in finance, and I think it's been discussed in a lot of different meetings, but we haven't all had a chance to talk about it together at the same time. So I think I'll let Sean start off and talk about the list a little bit, and
Sure.
then we can kind of open it up. Okay?
Yeah, so usually around this time of year, we start to look at our staffing priorities and some possible additions to staffing based on movement of staff, resignations, retirements, and then needs that have been put forth by the administration. So over the last couple of months, the administration has looked over the potential areas where we would benefit greatly as a district from adding staffing. And with, of course, a close eye on the budget, and working closely with Mr. McLaughlin, and of course, looking at what gives us the most benefit. So with that, the list that was presented to the board that you've got in your notes is a list of staffing priorities, and what we try to do there is prioritize them. So you'll see that towards the top of that list, you'll notice the positions like the interventionist, ESL teacher, the GNT position, all are receiving a 1, if you will. Really, that's based on the fact that we feel there's a great need in the kid. And I'll skip the interventions for now because you've gotten some background on that. We can certainly return to that with questions. But the ESL teacher is really an area for us where we've seen a growth in our ESL population over the last couple of years. It certainly warrants an additional position. In fact, this year we've even had to look at adding sections to existing staff beyond the traditional schedule for those teachers, because we have seen an influx. We must continue to deliver the required number of minutes for those children, which is, we're seeing the largest growth at the elementary level, so that's 30 minutes that we need to provide those children each day, and it's becoming a challenge for the staff, who now, many of them, we have 2 dedicated ESL teachers are traveling between multiple buildings, and so they have a unique schedule in that some of their time is travel time designated in their schedule, and so they're literally racing from building to building just to ensure they're getting the necessary time, and then in some cases it's touch and go with the amount of time that we're giving to these children. And these are really children that need this ESL instruction, and so in working with Ms. Stotler, our ESL supervisor, and Mr. Markarian, myself, other administrators, we feel this is a great need for us at this time. The GNT positions, I know Dr. Heineman has talked to the board on a number of occasions about this. This would be year 2 of the math GNT curriculum, allowing really the telescoping to begin in year 2. I'll certainly save any program-specific questions if they come up. I can answer them, or Dr. Heineman, I think, is still here. There he is. Yeah, he can answer those if they arise. The floating nurse position is one that, speaking from a human resource perspective, it's going to be tough to staff, but it's one that we need because we have situations across the buildings where when nurses are doing screenings, or we've got field trips taking place where nurses have to go on that field trip, we are calling in sub-nurses and many times are short-staffed and have to pull nurses from Annan or Ridge where they have 2 nurses and then they're short-staffed. So school nurses are becoming harder and harder to find, and so our sub-nurse population is just not large enough to allow us to guarantee that we're always staffed. And this is something that would allow us not only to not be understaffed when we're doing screenings, which take place in all the buildings, but also allow us to send a nurse on a field trip with children when we're required to do so. So that's become a real issue for us over the last couple of years with nurses. In fact, the board may remember, we even raised our sub-nurse rate just to be competitive with our neighboring districts, and it's still become difficult to even attract sub-nurses, let alone a 0.6 nurse. But we feel like that's a real need for us at this time. The other top priority really for us is 2 positions at the high school. That's a math position, which I should actually say is primarily the high school. We're happy to talk about this. Anyway, this is a new program at Ridge, our AP Computer Science program, which is making a return after a long absence. And the positive is we've had quite a response to the program, but we also want to ensure that we do have an on-staff expert, somebody that can teach it, but our class sizes are already high. We've been pulling, giving a couple of sections to the staff member and to help reduce class size, and to take that staff member's schedule potentially, we would be looking to bring on a math teacher. There's also the potential that we may look to split this position, whereby this person might be a 3/5 Ridge teacher and a 2/5 Annan teacher. That would depend on how the numbers fall, how our sections fall, and we could certainly use some reduction at Ridge as well. And also, it would allow us potentially to not backfill the position that's going to be vacated by Tara Bowman, who's filling in for Kristen Wolf, at least during the first half of the year. Finally, there's and again, I can do a cursory look at all of them, but I'm just giving you the highlights of the top priorities, is that PE teacher. So the PE teacher, you know, the board, over the last couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago, we riffed a couple of PE teachers when we brought in our Option 2 program, because we had a number of children who were taking courses, taking PE off-site, if you will. However, what that's created is very large class sizes for the existing children who are still in PE. And so there are some PE classes that we're running with 50, 60, 70 students assigned to one teacher. And it's a safety concern for us. It is not a requirement that you have a certain number of children per teacher, but we feel like it is something that we may want to address, we may want to look at. We've got, again, not in every PE class, but there are some larger PE classes. And again, as you look down the list, you'll see, while they're not as high a priority, there's still a number of other positions at Ridge that we'd like to see. Again, not as high a priority. The reason they're not, I should mention, is our class sizes aren't as high in, for instance, language arts, in science, in social studies. It's not to say that they're not needed, but you can see as our large student population moves into Ridge, we're starting to identify needs that haven't been addressed over a couple of years. Now it's starting to become an issue where, yes, we do have some class sizes of 29, 30, 31. Are our averages in the mid-20s in most of our classes? They are, but we would like to really have the opportunity to look at certainly that reduction in math and potentially in social studies and in language arts. But based on this list, we really feel our top needs are the interventionist position, ESL, the G&T positions, the floating nurse position, math, and the PE teacher. We do estimate that we'll have some savings with our retirees, and that would allow us to offset some of this cost. And certainly, that's a consideration as we look to be able to keep the budget flat. We wouldn't be increasing our cost of staffing, but it is something that, being very mindful of the job market, we'd like to be able to have the opportunity to start to post at least anticipated positions as districts are beginning their hiring phase this week. This is really the beginning of the hiring season for most school districts across the state. So certainly open it up to the board. I'll try to put it over to Robin.
Yeah, and just to tag on to what Sean was just saying, I mean, every year, and some people are relatively new, but every year around this time is kind of an awkward situation because we have a tentative budget that's almost going to be a budget, and we have some idea of how the money's going to come out with, you know, with retirements, and we have a pretty good idea of the kindergarten enrollment, but not entirely. You know, sometimes kids move in over the summer, you have to add a class somewhere, so we never have our exact numbers. So we try to, you know, figure out approximately how many positions we have already in the district that could be repositioned without adding money, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of what we're looking at here. So the top of the list, you know, we think we have the money for some of these positions based on what we've already got. We just don't know how far down we can go, and we won't have exact answers necessarily by the time we pass our budget, because some of those things get figured out later, and some class sizes and things happen over the summer. So, but we have to try to move forward with some of them because we like to advertise them and get good people when we can, you know, earlier in the spring. We can't wait till we have the exact final numbers for every single class size in the district and make all the final decisions. So we're kind of at that point now. And last last year, I know, some board members felt that they wanted to have more discussion about priorities, going into this phase. Because every spring this happens and we don't have all the answers yet. You know what I mean? We have a little time, to play around with it. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't know if you want to start with questions about different positions. Should we do that first and see if we can get answers before we start having a discussion?
If I can chime in, because we've already discussed this chart in committee a few times, there's a couple on the list that, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of the committee, are kind of don't require a whole lot of discussion. One of them is the CSL teacher, because it's a mandate. We need to staff accordingly to the numbers of students in the ESL program. So we need to do this. This, I don't think, is an optional thing. The other one, in my opinion, is this floating nurse. We are having so much trouble finding appropriate substitute nurses, and we're having to pay them a higher rate. So by having a person on staff, 6/10 to do the field trips to cover the substitute, it's really going to give us an advantage both financially and time, because we're not going to be looking for substitute nurses when we need them. So,
Is that something they would be 6 times every day, or do you call them when you need them?
No, this is a nurse working 3 days of the week. So we position that individual based on what 3 days we feel works best for the district. So it's a 3/5 position, right? 3 out of 5 days a week.
You would just schedule them for so many days and then.
Correct. And as Bev touched on,
What triggered my question?
yeah, the goal would be to offset the cost that we're currently spending on sub nurses anyway, at $170 a day. So, we're already spending for sub nurses. Now, that doesn't mean we still won't need to in some cases, but it will offset some of that cost.
And it was explained in one of the meetings I was in that if we have them scheduled for 3 days, then the nurses could schedule certain things, like all those screenings they have to do, or random drug tests, or whatever, around that person's schedule. So there'd be more other nurses available on the other 2 days for stuff like field trips, right, Sean?
Yes.
Sean?
The increase in the ESL population, do we get any funding for that from the state or federal?
Beyond the No Child Left Behind that we use for our tutoring, no. Now, our numbers were up 12 students from 2013. So we're up about 12 students, which we're up to 48 students. So that's a sizable increase, right?
The other question is, you mentioned about the PE classes and how large they could be. What is the average?
Well, I can tell you we're below 50 as an average, but we see wild swings year to year and marking period to marking period, right? So we know that some of the sports seasons, we've got more folks who are involved. And so our PE numbers shift wildly, so you're really averaging across the year. You're under 50, you're in the high 40s.
It also varies with labs.
It does, and that's correct, right?
Just to follow up on that one particular issue, when we talked about it in finance, I think one of the things we talked about was perhaps an aide could be used for that role, because it's really, since it's not really a static need that we have for the whole year, we might want to consider using someone who could just be available, just because if it's a safety issue, an extra body is good. It doesn't necessarily have to be a certificated teacher, so it's just a thought.
The teacher wouldn't be teaching how to play.
No, you could have a certificated staff member with the children, but then another adult, like an aide, could also be there to help another set of eyes.
Well, maybe we could look into whether that's an option or not, depending, follow up on that. Any other questions?
You mean from the easy ones?
The easy ones. Okay, any more questions? Okay.
Do we easy
Okay,
first?
let's knock off the easy ones. No more questions about ESL, nurses, PE teachers.
The other one, it's not quite as easy, but because the additional math teacher is really someone with the expertise to deliver the AP computer science class, it kind of makes sense to bring in someone who's got the skill set to do that. We can't just throw anyone into that role.
I did have a question. When you were going through that summary, you referred to something about middle school. Are you going to be teaching computer science in middle
No.
school, or just some other math?
No, the potential exists to possibly make this a 3/5 high school, 2/5 language middle school math position, so that the person will be a traveling teacher. We've got a number of teachers who do that now.
Teach math in middle school.
Not math, no, but we've got it in other subject areas. So world languages, for instance, we have teachers that travel between the buildings. The goal here, so potentially for this person, they'd be a 3/5 high school math and 2/5 middle school math. Again, it's dependent on section.
But the high school math is programmed?
The high school math would be potentially either AP Comp Sci, or we have someone on staff that could teach AP Comp Sci, and so they may take that individual's current schedule. Remember that they haven't sectioned completely yet, so a lot of that's, we know our numbers, but we haven't started actually assigning schedules yet to staff.
Let's open it up to hard questions then. Okay, John.
This is the biased opinion. When you talk about class sizes and you get into science, the labs are a problem because they're only staffed to have 24 students. After that, you get into problems with crowdedness, accidents, and so forth. So I understand that we can add a desk or two, but as far as the labs, I think we have some potential problems, accidents, some fooling around when it's really crowded. So I would just make that point about science classes.
And I know a couple of board members had asked to see numbers about the class sizes in these different areas at Ridge, just to get a sense, you know what I mean, of which ones are worse than others. So maybe we could get those numbers when we're looking at the Ridge positions later. Current class sizes or anticipated.
If you could get that would be a good thing.
Just to compare these particular positions.
Can I ask, I want information, I'm not even judging, it's the GNT. The GNT program, from my memory, is that this is for teachers teaching during the school year. This is not extra out of the school day.
No, this is during the school year, during the school day.
Right. So, and then, this is the same program that Brian proposed, that they have the intermixing of the different, I want to use the wrong word, I'm going to use the wrong word, level of students.
The clusters.
Clusters, thank you. So there's clustering going on. And so it's not just helping the GNT, but because of the GNT scenario, the clustering, we need more teachers. Is that what it is?
Not exactly, no.
Help me out.
Remember, this is year 2 of the program. So Dr. Heinemann.
Yeah, why don't you come up since you're here?
Because he did such a nice job the first couple of times, right?
Why don't you give a really brief recap of the plan of implementation of the program for us? Thank you.
It's tough to make a brief version of what I've done.
Make it brief.
Just to try to keep it simple, if you think of what we have this year, we have 2 staff members split between the 4 buildings. The idea was next year to go to a staff member in each building as we start the telescoping curriculum. So the difference between what we're doing this year and what's happening next year is, in addition to what the staff members are already doing, they will have specific telescoped accelerated curriculum starting in 3rd grade. Right? So that's kind of another layer to this. In addition to that, yep, during the school day. And part, they pull out or push in depending on the building.
Okay.
The other piece of it is much like what you see with the reading specialist and their job description, which is 80% instruction, 20% training. Part of what GNT staff do, actually part of what their job description is similar in that not only are they instructing students and having GNT, they are doing teacher training for a lot of the techniques and strategies for working with gifted children. So they have a similar role in that. So that's another part of what they're doing by having one person per building.
So I just want, because the feeling is that these additional staff are only helping a certain group. My understanding, because of the clustering, is that this staff is helping a larger group. So that's what I'm trying to get clarification.
Right. I mean, right now they're dealing. I mean, if you think of them like your reading specialists, right, at the other end of the spectrum, you have students who struggle with reading, right? They receive overlapping instruction. So they have their classroom teacher, and they have another teacher who comes in to assist in a specific area. Reading specialists see more students than a classroom teacher does, right? So technically they have a larger student load, they touch more students than a a classroom teacher would. Similarly, G&T teachers have that idea where they see more students than a classroom teacher would see, say a third grade teacher, but it's overlapping, right? These students already see another teacher, they have their classroom teacher, and they also, because of their needs, see a gifted and talented teacher at some portion, in this case for mathematics. So if you kind of imagine it that way, right, instead of other end, think of it like a mirror, instead of other side, that's probably the best way to understand it.
So I didn't understand. So when the G&T teacher is there with the student, is it one-on-one or in a group way?
It is in the group of students that were identified for G&T
It's a group
services.
of students. So it's not even with the whole class?
Well, no, those students might be within that class. So if this was my class, and John and Karen were my G&T students, you're lucky, you're the winners today, then I might be coming to class and working with them as within a lesson that there's also another teacher in the classroom. Or in a certain instance, it might be that they come to my classroom along with other, and obviously if you're larger than just two, we're expecting that there's going to be somewhere around 5-6% of the student population, so say 8 students in grade level, I may bring those 8 students to my classroom and do a different lesson depending on what's happening in the general ed curriculum. So it is a mix of push in and pull out.
So you don't work with the whole class ever?
They will not work with the whole class aside from working with a staff member on differentiated instruction strategies with the class. So they might teach a class with another teacher as a method of modeling a strategy. For instance, say we want to teach you how to use compacting or tiered lessons in your classroom. I'm going to come in next week, I'm going to work with you one day, I'll work with you another day. I want to come in, we'll teach a lesson together, here's how it works. Next week I'll stop in and you can show me how you tried it on your own. So it would be teaching students for the goal of training staff on how to use some of these methodologies.
I think maybe what Preeti's getting at is in one earlier presentation when you were talking about how by the teacher not having to differentiate to so many kids at the same time, it benefits all the students because then the teacher can focus on the other students and that whole aspect of it and how all the students in the class benefit, like the research.
Right, yeah, sure. So the cluster model, yeah, because remember we have 2 overlapping things, right? So we're using a cluster grouping model, and that strategy is when the G&T teacher walks out of the room, I have a more narrow band of students, right, with ability levels. And I have more tools in my toolkit that are provided by that G&T teacher helping me use those strategies to address the students in my classroom. So that is the other part of the model. So differentiated instruction is crucial to making this work. So when you look at the research, that is the underlying principle is making differentiated instruction a viable tool for all teachers and overlapping that with something that the strategies actually are frequently, interestingly, things you see with students who are struggling and also things you see with students who are achieving. Using those strategies to teach all students. So it's not direct, it's not me going into the room and using the strategy, it's me helping the staff member utilize the strategy.
And you have 2 right now for the elementary school?
There are 2, one split between Oak Street and Cedar Hill, and the other one's Liberty Corner and Mount Prospect.
Beth, did you have a question? Okay, Beth has a question.
This is a concern I've been hearing from some people in the community recently, and I kind of understand where it's coming from. So based on this model, we have additional instructional resources. If we're giving the clusters a model like you did in your presentation 1 through 5, and the ones were the G&T, correct?
I think it was actually letters, it was ABCD.
Oh, ABCD. So the A's were the G&T. And in this model, there are additional instructional staff in place for the E's and some of the D's with the reading support teachers or the math support teachers. And then for the A's, we have additional staff in place, which are the G&T teachers. And what I have been getting some feedback from members of the community this past week is, what about the kids in B and C? Now granted, there's an advantage because it frees up the classroom teacher to differentiate to them a little more, but we're not bringing additional instructional staff in place to support the B's and the C's. And this may not be a G&T issue, but an issue we as a board have to think about. We're addressing the needs of the struggling learners and we're addressing the needs of the G&T students, but are we really focused on our regular gen ed students? And that's where I'm getting some calls and emails from parents in the community that are very concerned that we're doing a lot on either end, but what about the average kids? So it might not be a question of a G&T staffing, but we have to have that on our radar too. Does that make sense?
So if I could just say real quick.
Yeah.
So you're right. So we have a special education staff, right? They're dealing with the students who are way below the grade level, right? And we have instructional support staff, reading specialists who are dealing with not the fourth group, right? To make it easy to think in your head, right?
Yeah.
The slightly below group. We'll have a group of gifted and talented teachers that will deal with that group. And then you have that 2 and 3 or B and C group that are your slightly above or on grade level groups. Yeah, right. They're not going to receive additional support. So two things. One is, part of the program is we're only going back to, if you don't forget, we're going back to our past level of G&T in this district. We're not really, in fact, adding anything. I see it as returning something that we used to have, right? Something that we lost when budgetary times got tough, and bringing back those
It was
staff.
a little different because my kids were in elementary school when they had the SEM model, and those teachers came in and provided activities for the entire class.
Right.
So the Bs and the Cs had the benefit of that resource too.
Right.
What
But
people
unfortunately-
are saying to me now is, we've got these G&T teachers for the A's, but my kid's a B or a C, they're getting nothing. Why are we ignoring them?
Well, what I'd say is the research in 4 universities and multiple districts shows that their kids are actually seeing quite a bit of growth based on this model. So just because they're not seeing it directly, just because the teacher is walking in my room, doesn't mean that the scheduling and instructional and training model put in play doesn't show benefits. So I know it's hard to sometimes wrap their head around that. How does that function? The teacher's not walking in, I'm not getting these brown bag activities we used to get or these other things. And in fact, I was here too when that model was phased out, and a lot of the reason it went away without much of a fight was because it wasn't seen as being very effective for meeting the needs of all the students. So if we're talking about looking at new growth models, right, how do we measure student achievement? We're looking at growth now, right? Not what they're doing, but how did they do September of 2014 compared to how they'll do September of 2015? And that growth, that change, is how we're going to be measuring students. This model was looking at growth. So exactly what we look at measuring is what cluster grouping was shown to increase, right, for all those groups. The one that was the surprise actually was the B groups. When you read the articles, that tended to be the surprise that jumped out. Everyone was this second tier of students who didn't meet G&T, or were still very high achieving students. They saw this giant growth compared to the control schools. Why was that? And so they kind of posited that it was because suddenly they're the top group in their classroom, and they feel like they can contribute more, and they're the leaders, and they took that role. So I know it's a tough thing to explain to someone who is not going to read several books and a pile of articles on it, but I think you tried to tell them, rest assured, I've read all of those for them, and I wouldn't be suggesting we put this in play if I didn't think it was going to show some positive results for them.
And maybe it's we have to do a better job of communicating that, because that seems to be one of the issues in the community right now. And more importantly, we have to be able to quantify and justify that it's working in our community. If we're going to keep adding staff to G&T, we have to show it's benefiting everybody.
Well, I'm hoping that the 4 will be, not that more staff is always better. There's always many things we can do when we have more staff, but the idea was to have 1 per building. So that would be where I would see us keeping it. And I think once we look at scheduling, we talked about what does language arts look like, and that was in my presentation that I hope to include language arts, the gifted and talented as part of this process. And it's just, we don't even know how many students we'll have in grade 3 next year. We haven't identified yet. So I can't make, I will calculate, it's really just something that's so far up in the air that we need to wait until, at the very least, summer to see what schedules look like and how much time the G&T staff would have in each building to do additional language arts G&T instruction for the following.
I think Sean wanted to
I
jump in.
just want to say the key is, I know Dr. Hyman touched on it, but for those groups, those students, those B and C students, really to look at the benefit of that teacher is the modeling and the coaching that's going to take place. That teacher, that G&T teacher is doing modeling and coaching with the classroom teacher. And really, it's interesting because I've seen a couple of those G&T teachers who have been working with staff, and their skill set and their strategies that they're using with the classroom teacher are very similar to what the instructional coaches, those instructional coaches that we have working with staff. And the whole point of that program is to give those teachers a skill set to then benefit all students in the class. But I think that, interestingly, these teachers have the same skill set to impart some knowledge, to impart, for instance, a compacting strategy that then the teachers turn around and are using with the whole class. That again, they've got someone following up on them, just like the coaches, making sure that strategy is being put into place. It's a peer, right? It's not an administrator. So I think that's another piece that I know Dr. Heineman touched on in the research, but that's a really important part of all this too. That again, I know it's something that it may not be quantifiable initially, but I do think we're seeing, I know in all the evidence I'm collecting with our coaching piece, that 20% for this individual is going to make a world of difference in terms of the PD, the professional development for the teacher, and will benefit all the students because the strategy is going to be used with all the children.
I think Karen is next. She was waiting a long time. It's okay.
I have a few questions though, so I don't know.
Go ahead. No, Karen, go.
My first question is, can you just explain if there's a separate or special certification for these G&T teachers?
There is not a special
Okay.
certification in New Jersey for gifted.
So my follow-up question is, would these G&T teachers be certified or capable of teaching gifted and talented language arts when that time came?
Yes, much like instructional support staff, they can teach either.
Okay, so there wouldn't be a future need for 4 more teachers?
There would not.
Okay, so then, with that in mind, I have a question about, you touched on moving to the language arts gifted and talented side of this in the future. With the model, and I'm going to go with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that works in my head better than the letters. If the 1s and the 5s are never going to be together, and the 4s and the 5s are never going to be together, what if a language arts gifted and talented is a 4? Are we going to have now separate clustering, and it's going to create...
Well, that's part of where we're not at yet, right? Is what do we do if we have... So the identification process is easy. If you look at what I've already suggested, or what we're using this year, right? We have the COGAT test without the verbal piece, right? So you have a verbal piece that we can put in play immediately. We have a math test, we're using just math, with an ELA piece that we can put into play immediately. We have Renzulli scales where we use mathematics and motivation, where we have language arts, Renzulli scales we can put into play immediately. So it would literally be, instantaneous, right, to turn around and create an identification program for ELA. The question would be, what does scheduling look like at the elementary level? And to be honest, I don't have an answer. I mean, we know that would be tricky, right? If we're going to cluster, are we going to cluster on mathematics and ELA? We're going to see some overlap, obviously. Would we have, how do we make those sections run? So that's, it's going to be a challenge. I don't have an answer, and to be honest, we haven't got to that point because, once again, we don't even know what next year's class looks like. This is kind of a conversation for next year is, now that we have grade 3 in play, we know how many kids we have, we know what a G&T teacher schedule looks like, what openings do we have? If we were next year to go to an ELA program starting in grade 3, or maybe starting in a different grade level, or maybe we have something that starts in 2 and works its way up, or maybe something in just 4 and 5. There's a lot of variability we can kind of use. At that point, then we can look at what does that schedule look like. So I don't have an answer because it could look like a lot of different things.
I understand. I guess what concerns me a little bit is it's perhaps a more palatable thing to the community, because as I look at the list that we're looking at tonight, which is a little bit of a digression, so pardon me, the top 3 priorities affect a small population of the overall student population. So when you're talking about what the community is feeling, I want to keep that in mind. So if we were to look at adding the language arts, the ELA, I keep calling it that, I'm old school, the ELA portion of the G&T, we might be touching on a slightly different population of students, which would make the idea of the addition of 2 additional teachers at least touch on more students, even if it's not next year. I understand that it wouldn't be next year, but I think going back to something Bev said about just community outreach to help understand what this program means to all students, all families, at all levels of learning ability. The part of the planning for the next phase, I think, is helpful. So that's why I was asking.
Right, and I don't disagree. I understand my hesitancy is to say, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you this thing, and then next October rolls around, and I'm up here saying, well, I really couldn't do. I don't want to make promises I don't think I can keep. That's something I want to do. I have the identification process worked out. I know what that would look like. What I really did, the big variable is what do the schedules look like for staff members, and how much time do they have. So I have to see how many students we identify this year, how well we're able to schedule the clusters in grade 3. I mean, that's really a big variable. I'm not sure we have to do that in June, July with the principals and see what they come out with. The tighter we can schedule everything, the more time we give the G&T staff, right? Right now, we're scheduled poorly, right? We didn't really cluster. We have 2 teachers between 2 buildings. They're spread very thin and not seeing the students nearly as much as we'd like them to. So we want to improve that first. And so that's step 1 is in June, July, how tight can we make these grade 3 schedules so that we maximize the G&T staff members' time, right? Because if I have 6 kids identified, I don't want 2 in this room and 2 in that room. You know, you want them clustered, so when I come in and say, now it's time for our lesson, I pull those 6 students out, and we can either have our lesson, or I can walk into that classroom and have my math lesson, and when I'm done, I've met now with every kid in that grade level, right, in one shot. Now, we don't have that this year. So it's very hard for me to get a real idea as to how much time they're gonna have on their hands. It's obviously more, right, because we want per building. I just don't know how much more, where I can come up here and say, definitively, we will have 3 grade levels of ELA, G&T, here's how it's gonna run, it'll be clustered. Now, I can't speak to that. Will I be able to speak to it in the fall? Absolutely. Because then we'll have firm schedules in place, we'll have some time, you know, under our belts with running through the routine and doing the instruction to see, okay, that works, it's effective, we're getting good feedback, it seems to work for the kids. Now let's see, you know, you're doing training this amount of time, when can we scale back on the training, right? Can we maybe bring it down to 10% now and use some of that time for ELA, use some of the math time to free up for ELA as well? You know, those are all possible, but right now they're just me making kind of guesses out, which once again, I don't want to make guesses and try to turn into promises.
I think Mike was next. I'm trying to keep track of who it is that I haven't.
Thank you for that input, because I would ask Brian, where's your focus? And I would say your focus is on the small majority of students. I think that's a big mistake, because the majority of students are the key to this. But I want to come back. When we cut back for special ed or gifted and talented teachers, we didn't see a big drop in test scores at all. Under the theory that you're proposing with the gifted and talented and the few parents that came out with, you know, the gifted and talented students and children, we didn't see the drop off. We eliminated, almost cut the program and made it disappear. The test scores and the performance of the district did not fall. And I would argue that this is, you know, yes, it may sound good, but we're missing the point. And I want to come back to something else that was argued. Language arts special ed teacher and a mathematics special ed teacher is not the same person. At least in my experience, it's not. They're very, very different people, very, very different skills. And if you start mixing the classes, the next step in this program, with gifted and talented liberal arts and gifted and talented mathematics students, you're liable to have poor math students mixed in with gifted language arts students and the other way around. I think the majority of the kids is where the focus ought to be. And I don't think it is. I think a couple of parents that came out a year ago and 4 or 5 of them, you know, that just got everybody's attention, and we're losing the big picture. And that's where I'm coming from.
Elaine? Sorry. I think a couple things. This is a program that we decided to pilot, and I think it's fair and right to let us continue and fulfill it, because it was a lot of work went into this, and I think certainly the 2 teachers for next year, whatever you know, people may have reservations, and I certainly have some going forward with what we've learned, and no one could have anticipated a lot of these questions or issues until we actually tried it. So while I do have concerns, I think we have to follow through and see how it goes, and then try to, you know, alter it and make it work for us. I think when we talked about it on that 1 month, I think I was on the curriculum committee, I think we talked about it, and I know, I'm never gonna let it go. And but I remember us saying that we wanted this to be sort of a pilot, and you know, we're not set in stone that we're going to follow this model, and we're going to see how it works, and hopefully it does do what we think it will for this 2s and 3s. The other thing I wanted to say is that I know with the language, with the math, the first thing we did was do binders. We weren't able to really get in there. And I would really like to see something like that be developed. I know it's a huge ask, but over the summer, so that we can give something at least to the language arts students, which you said are relatively simple to identify. So why can't we have some enrichment activity available in the classrooms on that? And at least it's not a full program, and it's, you know, it's not something that we'd want to do, but we do have additional staff now. And that might be something that we could do that would help identify other students and alleviate some of the concerns we have about the people who've already voiced about the program.
I mean, I agree with what Elaine just said, as far as giving, a chance to get the 4 teachers in there and build the program. I mean, I feel that we're not going to get the whole thing up and running for language arts next year, obviously, but once we have the 4 teachers, and they have some time to process, I'd like to see, something for next year for language arts, even if it's something, much more modified than what we would be doing down the road. Not that we needed to identify the kids, before September, but, at some point, you know what I mean? Even if it's informally, I think that would go a long way. Does anyone else have questions for Brian? Is up there?
Here's a comment. I agree with them that doing something for language arts would be a good idea. But just on Mike's comment, it's by statute, by law, that we need to have a gifted and talented program. This was not driven by 4 parents or 4 families. We had it, we should have kept it due to budgetary reasons. Our district is not following the law, and we need to go back and follow the law and implement a program. We're implementing a program, at least in my understanding, is even prior to, I don't know the name, but the one you referred to, but
SEN.
before that, there were 4 teachers in each school, and they were teaching math and English, and some were full-up, some was a variety of things, and programs have all changed. And I think Brian has brought in a program based on research, which gives me more hope. And I think all of us wanted to go to language arts too. There's always a matter of money. So I can only speak for the one teacher in Mount Prospect. One of my sons had her. She's quite capable of handling both language arts and especially in K-5. And she was quite inspirational in inspiring my particular son to do more. So I think teachers have that capacity to do both. Now, do they have it on all 4? Is this a constant thing? That would take staffing. I would assume Brian and Sean would try to get those type of teachers. So I still would like to get a chance to implement the program, and let's see what happens and then tweak it. I'm not ready to say it's wrong.
That's why discussion is great, because you get different opinions and you get a chance to think about it. So I think it's good.
Okay. My only question is, do we have a sense of when we'll know that it's when the data will show that it's actually working?
Well, the trouble lies in this, that it used to be NJS would be a nice, easy puzzle, right? You would just lay that out, and there we go, we show you the information, and now we have Park, and all of a sudden, I'm not so sure we're going to have good data or when we're going to get good data. So what we do have is MAP, right? We do have MAP scores. So I foresee that we will try to look at that. What we've done in the past, we look at how our MAP scores, not just internally, but how our MAP scores compare to other similar districts within the MAP profile, right? So does MAP give you this big national average? We know we're very skewed here in this district as far as that average goes. We can't compare ourselves to that because we always look good. It's nice, to always look good, but at some point you have a realistic view of how do you compare to similar districts, and so they have created reports for us to do that. So what I foresee doing is trying to start tracking the data through MAP using those reports to see if we're seeing growth on the MAP test that was greater than the growth we've seen in the past. I'm not conducting a formal piece of scientific research, but I think it'll give us at least a good view as to how effective it is. Now, the caveat is, we talk about a pilot, we haven't even, the plane's not even off the ground yet, right? So we haven't even had one day of instruction, nor do we know what kids will be instructing next year for this program. So, it may take 3 years for this cohort to come through grades 3, 4, and 5 to see whether it was effective for all students and to build in the tools for the staff members that they're going to be then incorporating in the classroom. We all know the wheels of education turn slowly sometimes, right? There's a lot of things going on, and trying to get these differentiated instruction we've been talking about, and Sean and I were talking today, probably for 10 years in this district, since we first got here. And it is a difficult process. So one of the points of this research-based model is to make it so you can do that process, right? Narrow that band down so it's a realistic ask of the teachers to say, this is what we need you to do, right? We need you to look at each kid We need you to do some pre-testing and see where they're ready to learn and teach them there. That doesn't happen overnight, right? So I would just encourage some patience with it. I know it can be frustrating. You hear the voice of the entire town even talking to you. I selected this model because I think it is the best model for all of our students. And time will tell how effective it is. It might be a small blip. It might be more than that. We really don't know. But I would say probably if we want to give it a good look, then the 3-year mark would be sensible.
Thank you, Brian.
You all right?
Helpful. Okay. Moving on. Do we have questions about the interventionist position? Do we want to start with that? Okay. Are you ladies going to, you want to come up, at least come sit in the front row so that if you have to jump up, you're both there. Yeah.
I understand and support the idea of intervention.
Can you talk a little?
Oh, you can't hear?
No, I'm sorry.
I understand and support the idea of interventionists. What I really can't get my head around is we already have 2 reading specialists in every building. Why can't either we remove a reading specialist or we train or we have, I feel like there's too much staffing for the same kind of goal. And I really didn't see any option of trying to it seems like there's some overlap of job requirement. And I know some of it is gen ed and some of it is to have the struggling learner. But I didn't get that out of your summary that you gave. And then that's what I really wanted to, maybe it was there, I just didn't get it.
Maybe you guys can jump in. I know at the curriculum meeting, Dave Hunter was also there talking about the reading specialist, and Lisa was talking about the, I'm going blank now, it's too late at night. Not the interventionists, the special ed positions that are helping the struggling students, not the interventionists. And the difference between the two and what they do.
And then is there any way to reduce staffing by combining the job responsibility?
Do you want to describe them again?
Yeah, we did.
Okay. Let Lisa try to do this one. She did a good job at curriculum about that.
So the interventionist really would be where that person isn't just focusing on reading or writing, and that's what this reading specialist does, or the lit support teacher. When we talk about a special ed student, they can have, or struggling learner, have difficulties or deficit areas in academics, and also organization, social, behavioral, emotional. So when we examined a lot of the action plans, and where we were getting referrals from child study teams, we saw that those were the main areas. So to say that a reading specialist could cover that intervention program, they might have an overlap in terms of some of the reading issues, but that's not the only piece that that intervention is looking for. So one of the examples I gave at the curriculum meeting was, there's a child in 2nd grade. At 2nd grade, when you come into the classroom, you have a procedure you should do. Some students will get that quickly, some students might not. So for this one student, she was having a lot of difficulty organizing and knowing to hang up her backpack, put her gloves away, get her items set, put her lunch money or her lunch tag, her pizza piece, a slice of pizza, pieces like that set up in the morning. So the teacher had come and was asking